This is TWiT.
Richard Campbell, I hear you've been roaming Florida for the brown liquor pick of the week.
I got here on Monday and straight down to the bar, as one does. And very fortunately, they actually had some genuine Florida bourbon, which is relatively rare. This one comes from St. Augustine, and literally not just the name, it's from the town. And if you don't know the story, St. Augustine is considered the oldest continuously occupied settlement of European origin in the continental U.S. It's a very precise description, because there's clearly been people living in the area for 12,000 years. You know, we've talked about the Timucua peoples. So there's always folks around this area. But when the Spanish came out this way, arguably Ponce de Leon was the first in 1513 and claimed it for the Spanish crown. But the founding of St. Augustine is Pedro Menendez de Alves in 1565, so a couple of hundred years before the colonies and all of that stuff. Now, the Spanish weren't the only ones. The French were around as well and also trying to colonize along the coast and had some conflicts there. Up more in the area around the Carolinas. The English show up in the form of Francis Drake in 1586, who raids and captures St. Augustine, sending the settlers into the wilderness, then realizes he doesn't have the resources to actually hold the fort, so he withdraws, heads north to the colony of Roanoke, and, things go back to the way it was. The conflicts in this area go back and forth literally for another century or so. You don't really settle down until what they call the Treaty of Paris in 1763. This is the end of the 7 Years' War, with Spain ceding Florida and St. Augustine to the British. In exchange, the British give up control of Havana, Cuba, to the Spanish. But then 20 years later, we have another treaty, also called the Treaty of Paris, because that's not confusing at all, which is the treaty that was signed around the American Revolution. This is when the English grant the 13 colonies independence from the British. And at that point, they give Florida back to Spain because, and Florida will actually stay under the Spanish rule until 1821, until the Adams-Onis Treaty, which actually turns the Spanish provinces of Florida over to what is now the United States. And Florida will actually become a state in 1845. So that's sort of setting the stage relative to where I am right now in Orlando. It's about a 2-hour drive north and towards the coast. The St. Augustine Distillery is a much more recent thing. So this is the efforts of two people, Philip McDaniel and Mike Diaz, neither one of which had a background in booze in any way. McDaniel came from retail sales and marketing. He ran the company. He was CEO of USI Promotions, which primarily worked with convenience stores. And when he retired, he got heavily involved in St. Augustine's cultural and tourism. And he saw an opportunity. He thought that a distillery would be a good addition to St. Augustine, mostly to do with the building. His co-founder, Mike Diaz, who is more in the background of accounting and taxation. So the Florida liquor laws are quite difficult to deal with. And so he was not a big fan, but they had this building. It's called the Ice Plant. So this was a building built in 1907 by Florida Power and Light. And this is back when they would ship ice to Florida for cooling. That's how refrigeration was done back then. So 15,000 square foot concrete structure. And this would provide the ice for shrimping and farmers and residents and so forth. But of course, when modern refrigeration comes along, and by the 50s, it's basically the ice business is out of business. It's no longer necessary. And so the building sat empty for many, many years, controlled by FP&L. But it was it was sort of a regeneration of the waterfront. It was an ideal location, the right size for a distillery. And so they had to get through the legal process. It took them about a year and a half to actually acquire the building and start a renovation on it. In 2011, and this ties into some earlier shows that you weren't a part of, Micah, so I'm sorry about this, but we talked about the craft distillery movement in the early 2010s. It started on the West Coast, largely California and so forth. And the group behind that was a group called the American Distilling Institute, ADI. And so McDaniel and Diaz went to a ADI conference in Portland, Oregon, and happened to connect with one Dave Pickerel, which we've mentioned before. Pickerel had been the master distiller Maker's Mark and was a big driving force behind the craft distilling movement. And so in 2012, McDaniel and Diaz got local funding from a bunch of local investors, acquired the ice plant, started renovations, took them a year and a half. They started distilling in 2013. They were only the third distillery ever in Florida. They also then pursued trying to improve the liquor laws because at the time in 2013, the only way to sell booze as a producer, as a distiller, was through distributors. You could not sell them yourself in any way. And so if you're going to do craft distilling, the whole business of craft distilling is that tasting room effect. And legally at the time, you couldn't even do that. And so by the time they opened the doors in 2014, they actually are now allowed to sell a bottle to individuals, but only one per year. So they're required to keep records of who buys any bottles directly from them. They gradually get those laws eased off. Now, whiskey takes time to make. So even when they started production in 2013 and laid up their whiskey casks, they then had to actually make some money. And so made some quick distill products like a product they call Florida Cane Vodka, which is vodka made from sugar cane, not rum. Rum is made from molasses. This is vodka. They also made a gin called New World Gin, where they use local Floridian botanicals, citrus, and things like that. They were also pressured because of the part of the world they're in to make rum. By 2015, they did start making rum, which they then aged in their bourbon casks. The first release of bourbon was in 2016. It was called Florida Double Cask. And as they started to do some finishing ages, they had a tough time getting sherry casks. But as it turns out, the San Sebastian Winery, which is literally just down the road from them, makes a port. And so they started doing port cask finishes. By 2022, they finally got what we would expect as craft distilling laws, which are common more on the West Coast. Now, often in the West Coast, when you talk about places like Portland or Oregon and Washington, they actually have serious breaks on their excise taxes. So if they stay under a certain production level, like 25,000 gallons, no excise tax. And as they scale up, the excise tax scale up with them. That never happened in Florida. No tax breaks at all. But they did finally got rid of the limits on bottle and by the glass sales, which now means that there's distilleries in Florida, and there's now 80 of them 10 years later, are allowed to actually have a bar on premises. The St. Augustine Distillery did not do this. They have a local bar right next to them that sells their product routinely. They didn't want to step on their product. So it's like, you want the bar's next door. By all accounts, these are very nice men. They won ADI Distillery of the Year in 2024. They support their local community hugely. Their tours there's a massive variety of them. You can make your own bottle of whiskey. You can learn to make cocktails. Like, they're very much into the sort of great parts of what it takes to make a great distillery. And the bottle I got my hands on and had a chance to taste, and I don't have it with me because I'm in a conference center, is the Florida Straight Bourbon. So it's a bourbon, which means it's at least 51% corn. In this case, it's 60% corn. And the normal bourbon mash bill is you'll always have 51% corn and then some amount of barley to provide the amylase that allows for the corn to be broken down into ethanol rather than methanol. And then a flavor grain in between. Typically in bourbons, this would be a rye. On a few, it's wheat. Not this whiskey. This is 60% corn and 22% malted barley, and then 18% wheat. So we would normally think of the wheat as a flavor grain, but it's actually more barley than wheat. So they're sort of doing a unique flavor combination. Now, they do their own milling and mashing on site. They use their own yeast and the closed-top fermenters. They use Vendome stills. These are proper American stills, relatively small. Their shipping still, or the first distillate, is a 2,800 liter. It's about 750 gallons. And then the spirit still is 550 gallons or 2,000 liters. So those are not huge, but they're proper size stills. Their spent grain after that extraction is sent off for cattle. So they're doing their best to reuse water and not waste any materials. Very contemporary style distillery. And that product then is put into new oak barrels. So they are bourbon casks, so they've been fired, but they've not been previously used. They get it from the Kelvin Cooperage in Louisville. And that's that connection through Pickerel to actually do that. And then 3+ years aging, which is, of course, the rules. What did I get from drinking this? It's very warm here in Florida and very humid. And that combination means that they tend to lose alcohol quickly over water, right? If they were in low humidity, like typically happens in Kentucky actually has a problem where they will tend to lose water and the ABV will go up in the barrel. That's not a problem here. So they're not going to do long aging here. So you're talking 3 to maybe 5 years, not too long, just because it ages so quickly and they have so much contact in that way. So a lot of fruity, sort of tropical fruit and citrus flavors in their whiskey. Drinks very nice at 43%, and young. It's not a complicated whiskey. This is very, very drinkable. The problem is only sold in Florida because they're a craft distillery. They don't have those big distribution connections, and they don't produce the quantity. They're just not in the pipeline. So you've got to come to Florida to get it. But a bottle of Florida Straight will cost you $50.
For just $50.
It's very reasonable. But if you're in Florida, make an effort. Now, they have some high-end versions, especially like $200 bottles. They want to go that way. I got nothing bad to say about Florida Straight. This is legit bourbon. It drinks really nice. It's got its own character to it from a company you will like. And that to me, I like the craftsmanship and I like good people. And these guys got them both.